Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a full review of the VIVO V40 Lite. Let's get started. This device is part of the upper middle range by price, but the truth is that there are some little things where it definitely comes to disappoint. Its most attractive point is possibly photography, although in this case, unlike its big brother, it does not integrate the collaboration with Zeiss, but in any case, I think that photography has managed to have a highlight in it. Its launch price in Mexico is 9,499 pesos. That puts it in competition with devices that can really surpass it in several aspects. So, as I say, the point where this device could make its case would be in photography and possibly in design. On the screen, you saw the reference price in dollars just to give you an idea. But remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. How about joining me to get to know it little by little so you can see if it is the option you are looking for or not? Let's start by talking about the design, because in this case we will find something attractive aesthetically speaking, as it is an extremely thin device with 7.65 millimeters thick. It is possibly one of the thinnest devices available today. In addition, it integrates curved screen, which definitely also gives it a much more expensive touch, to say the least. Although in this case it does not come protected with Gorilla Glass but with Scott Sensation, which is a glass that VIVO uses in some devices. The truth is that it's a glass that doesn't have as much reputation as Gorilla Glass, so we're not so sure about its resistance, but it should be good. The display doesn't have symmetrical bezels, so it's not as nice in that aspect. The bottom bezel is slightly thicker, though nothing really serious. On the right side, we find the volume buttons along with power button in a golden frame in this color edition. Although it's a plastic frame, so it's not going to defend too much in case of any fall. On the top side, we are going to find, interestingly enough, a slightly concave finish with a microphone placed there, while the left side is completely smooth. At the bottom, we are going to find the tray where we can place only a SIM card and also a micro SD. We are going to find also here at the bottom another microphone USB-C port and the only speaker that this device has. Finally, on the back, we are going to find a very nice finish on this edition, which is called White in Sleep, as it seems to have some brush strokes that give it a very nice touch. In some light angles, it may come to look slightly different. Aesthetically, it is very nice, as even the camera module has a textured ring that gives it a very elegant touch, especially in this combination of white with gold. And one last design parameter would be the ruggedness. In this case, it has the IP level of resistance against water and dust. It means that it's going to resist simple splashes, but it's definitely not going to stand the test of being submerged. Maybe it will withstand being submerged at a very short depth and for a very short time, but it really doesn't have much to offer against several of its competitors. VIVO, like many other Chinese manufacturers, are curiously trying to highlight that on the inside it has a special structure that can better cushion shocks or resist pressure. Honestly, it is something that is hard to prove, but it is an assertion that VIVO and other manufacturers are making. I tried to apply a little pressure on this device and it really feels solid. I don't think it's going to bend or break just from keeping it in your back pocket, but it's not like it's characterized as an ultra rugged device or anything similar. And by the way, I was forgetting to mention to you that this back cover is plastic on the Sleep White edition, but on the black edition it is indeed glass. A bit of an odd difference perhaps to achieve this different finish. The screen is 6.78 inches. It is a bigger screen than the average smartphone, so it does give you more space. Its resolution is Full HD+, 1080 by 2400 pixels. It reaches a pixel density of 388, so it's a sharp screen. All small texts are going to look good. We're also going to find AMOLED technology, so it gives us intense colors, very high contrasts, good viewing angles. The truth is that it is difficult to find a screen of poor quality at this price, so here fortunately it does not disappoint us. It has a peak brightness of 1300 nits, although it does not support HDR content. This screen has 120 Hz in its refresh rate, so yes, it is capable of displaying fairly fluid movements. And finally, regarding the minimum brightness, it seems that it is very comfortable. And if you add to this that it does have the extra dimming option in the accessibility options, it will definitely be very comfortable to use at night. In this case, it has 3 different color calibrations, although personally I think I prefer the default one, as the professional setting gives a slightly warmer representation, even a bit yellowish I might say. So the default setting I think is the most accurate. But if you want slightly more saturated colors, you can choose the light setting. So it's up to you as a user, but personally I would like to have some presets that are a little more accurate. And the sound is probably one of the most disappointing points of this device because it only has one speaker, which is unacceptable in this price range. Even cheaper devices are going to include two speakers these days, and it is also a speaker that really has little bass frequency presence. You could perhaps forgive it for only integrating one speaker if it were a very high quality speaker, but the truth is that it is a fairly simple speaker. In sound, it is perceived as a device that costs a third of what this device costs. The truth, very bad experience in this section. In addition, it has no headphone jack, although this is something more common in the price range. But before we tell you a little more about the headphone experience, let's listen to a test of this speaker, although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. VIVO. But not only does it disappoint at the hardware level, but even in software it has very few options to customize the audio. It simply brings a section where it will supposedly give you a little more resolution to the audio, but honestly there is not much difference with such a simple speaker. You can also try to customize the way the audio is projected based on the headphones you have connected or based on your age. So you can run a little test to have the sound customized a little bit your way, but it doesn't have an equalizer, it doesn't have Dolby Atmos. Instead it has a feature called Super Audio that will try to give you a kind of immersive sound, but the truth is that it doesn't compare to competitors. The one feature that I would like to highlight as a positive thing at the software level is the audio redirection. This option allows you to send the sound of some apps to your connected Bluetooth speaker and keep the sound of other apps on the device. So you could be sharing music with friends while listening to or watching a video directly from your cell phone. That's a feature that only Samsung and Vivo have. That's why I usually highlight it, but in all other things the experience is very simple. But back to talking about the headphones, fortunately it does include support for the aptX codec, which is higher resolution, and also for LDAC, so it has good support for wireless headphones. The device integrates two microphones, so it has the basics. Not much to say about it, let's listen to a test.
Esta es una prueba de sonido grabada con los micrófonos del VIVO V40 Lite.
It seems to me that it records voices in a very simple way. Even in a quiet environment, it seems to have tried to apply some noise cancellation, which makes the sound lose a little more quality. The truth is that they are also simple microphones. But let's hear how they behave in a much noisier environment to try to simulate a concert environment. Fortunately, in this case, it seems that there is no severe distortion, nor does it have a bad control of its gain, so it is acceptable behavior in these environments. And finally, now regarding the vibration, you should know that its motor is on the Z-axis, so it has a very simple vibration that also does not get to take advantage too much in the interface, so the device is not able to give you a very premium feedback in the hand when you are controlling its buttons or something similar. This kind of vibration feedback you can even perceive on the keyboard. In this case it is simple, although fortunately not as simple as other devices, but it could be better. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.0 or aperture and fixed focus. In this case we could highlight the good aperture it has. Well, that is a fairly bright lens, and also at the same time is very wide, 19mm, although the fact of having fixed focus could complicate things a bit. To access the camera quickly, you can press the volume down button twice, although this gesture is disabled by default. It is also a gesture that you will only be able to use with the device locked, so if you are in any other application and want to quickly access the camera, there is no quick shortcut. Something that bothers me personally is that when you rotate to the front camera, it immediately switches to portrait mode. So you have to be careful, because if you had the blur effect enabled but didn't want an out of focus photo, you're going to get a very weird feeling. Also, curiously, within the portrait mode is where Vivo places most of its options, because in normal photography mode, we only have access to different color filters that we can change their intensity. But if we want to access a beauty mode, for example, we have to enter portrait mode specifically. So you will probably need to turn the blur effect off and on manually constantly. Here, for example, we can apply other color effects and even image overlay to give it a creative style. So it can become attractive to a group of people. And in addition to this, we are going to find the beauty options that in this manufacturer are usually very extensive. For example, we have some beauty presets, but you can also access manually, parameter by parameter, and it's a huge amount of parameters. Even your chin profile and other things that I don't usually see on other types of devices are here. You can tweak very specific parameters of your face, like the nose, the lips, the distance between the eyes, and many more things. So this is the perfect device if you want to look very fake. We're also going to find some makeup options. So by default, it's able to apply certain makeup effects on your face. And finally, we have a gallery of poses, although the first load may take a little while. And these poses can help when maybe you don't know how to position yourself to take a picture. So you just select it, and you can also rotate to change. And I don't know if it's distinguishable through the camera, but it shows you a little grid, so you try to position your hand and your face the same way. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's a dotted line that comes up for reference, so you can position yourself in the specific way. There are lots and lots of poses here that you can guide you through, divided into different categories, and there are even some that are in couples, which can come in handy if you want someone to take a picture of you and you want it to look good. Vivo usually focuses a lot on the quality of selfies, and this will be no exception. It really gives us a very good color, unlike other manufacturers that give us very pale colors. In this case, believe me, they are very accurate and intense colors. And the level of detail it achieves is also very high with a 32 megapixel photo. However, you need to be at a very specific distance from the camera to get this detailed picture, since it has fixed focus. So if you stretch your arm too far, notice that you start to lose detail because the device will take the picture out of focus, which I find curious because it's a 19mm camera. In other words, it's one of the widest front-facing cameras I've seen. But you can't take advantage of its width because you need to be close to the camera to get a good result. Although obviously, if you want it to be too close to the camera, the result is also going to be out of focus. Although it seems that for group shots, try to do some optimization to slightly raise the level of detail. And in this case, you could make good use of the space offered by this 19mm camera. You can have a large group of friends and everyone will come out well framed. Indoors, note that it still offers good color rendition. Although in order to maintain a good level of detail, it doesn't eliminate noise as strongly. But honestly, it's not unpleasant. I think it still gives us good quality pictures in medium light environments. And in night scenes, it does an excellent job. Although please don't go getting confused with the aperture showing the watermark that says f16.0. That shows it when you turn off the blur effect inside portrait mode. And as I showed you, the device practically forces you to use portrait mode when you want to take a front-facing photo. But the result specifically, I think, is positive. We don't see as much noise present, and in fact, even though there's not a lot of noise, it does maintain a good level of detail. So for the price range, I think selfies could become its specialty, with the only detail being the fixed focus, which is very specific. Note that in night backlit scenarios, it also manages to expose the most illuminated areas of the photo in a good way. Although in this case, it seems that it did eliminate more noise than necessary. And so it gives the impression of having a kind of beauty mode with facial blurring. But in reality, what it did is try to eliminate the noise to get a clean picture. So in very dark environments, you might end up losing a little bit of detail. But in the price range, we could understand it. And in much darker environments, without any direct light source, notice that the preview looks excessively noisy. And the result, as I tell you, in order to remove that noise, may look as if you had applied a beauty mode or some special blurring. But considering the level of darkness, I think the result is still acceptable. And if you use the screen as a flash simulation, you're going to be able to get a little more saturated color, but it still looks very blurry. Note that the front portrait mode at night is not going to look as detailed. In fact, it looks low quality in this regard. So we could say that here it does disappoint a bit. And in daytime, we realize that it doesn't manage to keep objects in focus either, nor does it have a very good dynamic range. So for portraits, it will not be so attractive. By the way, I forgot to show you how it behaves in backlight, and note that the preview is not very well optimized, let's say. But after taking the picture, I think it does manage to balance highlights and shadows well. It keeps the color rendering on the face well. There are still some slightly overexposed areas, but nothing really serious. I think it performs well here. For the rear camera system, we will find a 16mm ultra-wide camera. It is not exaggeratedly wide. It has 8 megapixels with a 2.2f aperture and in this case fixed focus. So it's a rather simple camera. Then there's the main 26mm camera with 50 megapixels, 1.79f aperture and autofocus. That will be the most attractive camera. And finally, there is a very tiny camera, which is the 2 megapixel macro camera. I don't think it's very useful, but it's there. And as is already a hallmark of these VIVO devices, we're going to find the aura light, which by the way, we can customize in its warmth, so we can transform it into a cooler or warmer light manually. It's hard to show it maybe through this camera, but I think if I try to cover it, you can get to notice a little bit more how it's able to change its warmth. In this case, just like its big brother, this setting can be automatically or it can be manually. Although this one might not be as precise, as it doesn't seem to integrate a color temperature sensor on the back. Note that it is a device that is not so agile in continuous shots with the shutter, and if you hold down, you can start a burst of up to 20 pictures. The camera response doesn't seem to be very good. In different attempts, we tried to capture the number 3, and as you notice, it almost always took a quarter of a second for the device to actually take the picture. So, it's not a useful device for taking the exact moment. The burst takes almost half a second to start, so I remind you that it's not a very optimized device for what it has to do with the speed of capture. But one thing that is very good is that it has different color representations. The default one is called contexture, and that's the one we were using for our tests. But you can also switch to a vivid setting, which is going to give us a little bit more intense color. Or you can switch to a natural setting, which is going to give slightly softer colors. That's something that I personally like a lot because the device can adapt the colors of your camera to suit your taste. If you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure and focus. But if you want more parameters, you can also access the professional mode, where the device will let you adjust the exposure compensation, the ISO that can go up to 3200, the shutter speed that can go up to 32 seconds, white balance, the type of focus, and note that it also allows us to take pictures in RAW if we want to have a much more professional development later. In portrait mode, we can also open all the options that we had seen directly on the front camera, along with the light styles, color filters, also all the face filters that you can select. And finally, all the guides for different poses to take pictures of your friends or to have them take pictures of you. This device is not able to immediately recognize QR codes on its main camera interface. To do this action, you must enter Google Lens with the access that is in the upper left corner. And once you are inside this application, yes, you can do the scanning of QR codes. But curiously, you must first press the button, unlike other devices that do it without pressing the button. And regarding the documents, notice that in the automatic mode, it suggests you to enter the special mode to be able to do this scanning. And you can't use the ultra-wide camera when trying to crop these documents. Notice that the cropping is done automatically, but it doesn't apply any color optimization to make it look like a more advanced scanner, nor does it allow you to add pages or anything like that. The only thing you could do would be to print it to PDF through the system option. But the device doesn't really have such advanced features. Obviously, the main camera does let you access a high-resolution photo mode, so you have a picture that you can crop later. Although I must tell you that it looks a bit artificial sharpness, it doesn't seem to have as much detail as we would have liked. But yes, you could get to have high-resolution photos in spec. Not so much in reality. The ultra-wide camera doesn't have such an advanced resolution, so the results are not as detailed. And also note that it has quite a bit of chromatic aberration that you get to notice, even without necessarily being the edge. So really, the photography is very basic. The main camera improves its performance a lot. having even more accurate colors and greater saturation. No serious chromatic aberration is noticeable, and no distortion at the edges, so it is a much higher quality camera. And something that is also good to note is that this device has 3 different color rendering settings. The default one is called texture, and as the name says, it allows you to have a little bit higher contrast to keep the textures well. But there is also a vivid setting, which supposedly will increase the saturation of the colors. Although I honestly don't see that much difference, I notice more difference in the warmth of the colors. And finally, there is the natural setting, which again is supposed to give us slightly softer colors. But in general, I only see a difference in the white balance. I don't really notice that much. And the same can apply with the ultra-wide camera, where if you notice a little more difference in contrast above all, but in the colors not so much. For the rest of the tests, we will use the preset that comes from the factory, which is the texture preset. In motion pictures, I think the ultra-wide camera performs relatively well. The main camera also performs well in this type of movements. But indoors, you notice that the ultra-wide camera starts to suffer much more. Admittedly, it was a slightly darker setting than normal. But the truth is that it wasn't as dark as it appears in the photograph either. The main camera does do a better job. It doesn't come out as dark a picture, and it saturates the colors much better. So the ultra-wide camera really suffers when there isn't as much lighting. In backlit scenes, you notice that it doesn't have an optimized preview. However, the result with the ultra-wide camera is good, as for the balance of highlight and shadow areas. But remember that in this kind of light conditions, it could further reveal the chromatic aberration that this device has on the ultra-wide camera. The main camera performs better obviously in this kind of lighting conditions, so it does not represent any problem for it, and even applying zoom 2x to have a perspective of 52mm. We still appreciate a good quality in backlit scenarios at night. The ultra-wide camera raises its level. I actually expected worse considering what I saw in indoor conditions. But note that it even manages to expose the brightest areas well enough. It maintains color saturation well. It removes just enough noise so that it doesn't turn out such a blotchy photo. But not so much to still maintain the level of detail well, so it's a good enough photo. The main camera does an even better job in the brighter areas. And it maintains a better level of detail by removing even more noise. So the main camera performs well. Although if you start applying zoom, it's going to show a bit more noise and graininess present. And even though it has a night mode, the result is completely the same as the auto mode. And in an area without direct lighting, look at the preview and see the result. The truth is that it does a very good job in terms of color management. Although obviously by eliminating the large amount of noise that is generated, it also loses quite a bit of detail. The main camera does a more natural job in color and even in noise management, and I remind you that this was a very low light situation. Now let's take a look at the full zoom range. This is the ultra-wide camera. Then the 26mm main camera. This device also includes the 2x zoom preset, and apparently it does manage to maintain good quality, although it does show that it is digital zoom. But it's not bad at all at this setting. Now you're looking at the Zoom 5X, where I think the device does manage to take good advantage of the high-resolution sensor to maintain a high level of detail considering it doesn't have a telephoto camera, and the maximum zoom is 10x. And obviously, we are not going to find an exaggeratedly high quality. But as far as I can see, I think it does optimize the sensor well. For macro photography, the main camera does not allow to be so close to small objects, because there will be several out of focus areas, that is, it doesn't have a uniform focus, but still I think you can have nice macro photography results. In fact, applying zoom 2x, I think the result can look even more attractive, and in general with good colors. So even though it does include a macro camera, actually the result is very strange in colors. It doesn't have as much detail, although it will achieve a slightly more even focus, but personally I like the result better with the main camera. This device also gives you the ability to take panoramic photos that have a good level of detail. So they are high resolution photos that also have a good dynamic range, so we don't see some very dark areas or some burnt areas. In general, we could say that it is a panoramic photograph of very good quality, especially for the high resolution it has. The truth is that it comes to surprise a lot in this section. Although it does not allow you to use the ultra-wide camera, but anyway, it seems to me a strong point. And speaking of strengths, the portrait mode definitely comes to be highlighted. Notice that it's going to give us a very good level of detail in the foreground, it keeps the objects well in focus, it makes a good blur, applying a nice bokeh effect in the background. So there is no doubt that the portrait mode is remarkable, as it even performs well in backlit conditions. Also note that it allows us to use a perspective of 52mm as if we were in front of a telephoto lens. Although it obviously doesn't maintain as high a detail as we saw with the 26mm lens. But if you don't zoom in too much, I think it can give you a more professional photo perspective. And note that it still keeps objects in focus well and is able to blur gaps. And even though this device doesn't integrate a collaboration with Zeiss, note that it does include different bokeh effects, some much more exaggerated than others. In fact, you can adjust the intensity of the blur by simulating the aperture. If you have a brighter aperture, you will find a much more aggressive bokeh effect. And if you have a more closed aperture, it will be a much more disguised bokeh effect. But notice that you have some heart effects, some star effects. Ideally, you'll have some lighting behind it, maybe like light leaks, or specifically lights to generate these effects. There's also a butterfly effect if you want to get a little more artistic. Flower effects, and as I say, some other much more intense effects depending entirely on your taste. But in general, I think portrait photography can really stand out because of the good detection it has, and also because of all the effects it has available. Also because it also allows us to take portrait pictures with a telephoto perspective. For video recording, note that it can indeed go up to 4K at 30 frames per second, but only with the main camera. Note that the ultra-wide camera disappears from the available options, so if you want to record with the ultra-wide camera, it must be in Full HD at 30 frames per second, because if you choose the 60 setting, again the ultra-wide camera disappears, which confirms that in video, the ultra-wide camera is quite weak. In the video options, you will also get a button where you can load different color filters to give a special touch to your videos, but the resolution drops to HD. That is to say, it is a very low resolution image for a full 2024. Fortunately, it also integrates the beauty options and several parameters of facial retouching that we had seen in the photographs, but again, if you use any of these options, the video drops to HD. So it is really not recommended to record with these options. When recording video, the device allows you to take pictures. It also allows you to pause and resume your recording seamlessly, and turn on the aura light on the back with the same color temperature selector so you can illuminate with a color matched to the environment. That's a very good thing. The aura light is one of its strongest points. It also includes a slider for zooming, but let's just say it's simple since it doesn't allow us to switch between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera. Finally, it includes a microfilm mode that are templates that you can fill in later. Note that some include some overlapping images to give a different effect to each of these videos. These templates must be downloaded with an internet connection, but you can use them later even if you don't have a connection. And I insist that they would allow you a kind of video editing in real time. So if you want to save time and you like some of these templates, you could take advantage of them to have special effects in your video without applying any watermark or having to make a special payment. As I mentioned, the main camera of this device does allow us to record video in 4K. In fact, it is of good quality in terms of color management. It's obviously going to give us a good level of detail, and it doesn't look like it's having problems with exposure, that it's jumping around too aggressively or anything like that. So I really liked it, although to get the wide perspective, you have to disable the stabilization, and that's obviously going to be noticeable. If you want an even wider view, you can have the ultra-wide camera, but this can only record in Full HD, so it loses a lot of detail. It does, however, retain rich color. Slightly higher than natural in fact, but it results in an attractive video overall. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera may struggle a bit more to define detail well, although I think it works well with noise, which is only present in the darker areas but still maintains good color. The main camera will be much better in these types of environments, more intensely removing noise without sacrificing detail level. Curiously though, colors look slightly pale in these settings. In backlit scenes, the ultra-wide camera will not be able to expose the brightest areas well. It will always give priority to the face, and if the face is closer to the camera, it is going to intensify this burnt light area in the back in addition to the chromatic aberration seen, for example, in the trunk. The main camera does not improve in this respect because it also gives priority to illuminating the face well. When it does not detect the face, the lighting could look a little better balanced, but when it detects the face, it will always overexpose the most illuminated areas in the back, so it will be more advisable to record from the front. At night, the ultra-wide camera has more grain, and in the moments where there is a more abrupt change of light, the noise can also be noticed with greater intensity. In darker areas, it doesn't pick up enough light and is obviously not able to properly expose the brighter areas. So it's a simple video, although I like the balance it makes between noise control and level of detail. But definitely it will be much more advisable to record with the main camera that has much higher illumination, controls noise also in a good way. In fact, in this case, it is almost imperceptible noise or grainy unless you are in an area where there is a set of light source with very dark areas. But even in the darkest areas, we will appreciate a good noise management and good light input. The only thing we could criticize it would be a little unstable white balance, but I think that in general for the price we cannot get so demanding and the quality is acceptable. Now you are watching a clip with the main camera but the stabilization disabled, as remember that the manufacturer allows you to turn it on or off as you wish. If you're wondering why on earth I would want to turn stabilization off, well, to get the widest possible perspective, but it's definitely not recommended to turn it off. Also, when you turn stabilization on, the resolution drops to full HD, so even though you gain very good stability when walking or even running, the level of detail is dramatically decreased. The ultra-wide camera with stabilization turned off will also show very jerky movements when you are walking and even more so when you are running. When you turn stabilization on, there will obviously be a clipping that will cause you to not take advantage of as much range, but it does improve significantly by stabilizing the movements well. You don't feel very aggressive compensating movements even when you're running. So I really like the stabilization, but it's unfortunate that it doesn't allow stabilization in 4K. Recording with the ultra-wide camera, it doesn't allow us to zoom. In this case, if you zoom while recording in full HD, we will still notice a good enough stabilization, which is always useful in distant scenes. Its maximum range is 10x. But if you record in 4K to get a slightly sharper image, you will miss the stabilization a lot as the movements become too noticeable, although its maximum zoom is still 10x. So it's up to you what setting you want to use. We definitely like to have both together. The focus also handles it well in fast movements. It's a focus that does get to react, it doesn't get confused easily, and even in slightly more useful movements we also see good action. Although you do get to notice the moment of refocusing, but nothing really serious. The fast camera mode is only available for the rear camera and is not stabilized. Also, it can only be in full HD and the colors look a bit pale. So let's say it's a simple fast camera. Although if you leave the device on a fixed pace, yes, you could have much more attractive results like a time-lapse of some landscape as its maximum speed is 960x. So in that sense, yes, it could work. But if you want to record more dynamic scenes without the device fixed, maybe it's not so recommended. Slow motion will also be available only for the rear camera system. In this case, it works exclusively in HD at 120 frames per second. So yes, we could consider it disappointing because it won't offer us that much level of detail. The front camera does have the ability to record video in 4K, and that is something that is appreciated for the good detail that we find. But it's not going to offer us nice stabilization in this mode, so it's very noticeable the steps we're taking. Also, I remind you that having fixed focus, you need to be at a very specific distance to be well focused, and if you want to bring some object closer, it's not going to focus. In addition, the backlight performance is quite poor, so it is not such an attractive camera. Indoors, we are also going to notice more noise and grain. Although the colors are maintained with a good intensity, but I insist that it does not seem to be very attractive. Curiously, at night it makes a greater effort to eliminate noise, and the result is still acceptable, considering that we are talking about conditions with much less illumination. Fortunately, the color maintains a good level of saturation, and that is what rescues the quality of this video. In addition, obviously, to the fact of being compatible with 4K, but it is not something that is so remarkable. Something that is remarkable is that it integrates dual recording mode, so you can have the front camera and the rear camera at the same time. And in this case, it can be in full HD, although by default it is in HD. And in both cases, it is going to be at 27 frames per second, interestingly. Something important to note is that it does not allow us to move the floating frame, although fortunately it does allow us to apply zoom and also has autofocus enabled. It also has a circular mode, and if you want to move its position, you must adjust it before starting the recording, and with this setting, it has exactly the same behavior. It also has a heart mode, although it is focused on using the device vertically as the heart does not rotate. So I think it is more focused on use in stories. We can also split the screen completely in half, but to make all these changes, it is necessary to stop recording first, so we do not find so much versatility. And yes, we can change the size of this distribution, but as I say, it is necessary to stop the video to make all these adjustments. In the software, we will find Android 14 with Phone Touch OS 14. One of the customization layers of VIVO, but personally I think I will start to criticize this because in China they use Origin OS, which is a much more advanced layer, which offers many more features, but for the rest of the world they leave us Phone Touch, which is really very simple, and with few options. In addition, the manufacturer does not offer a clear update policy, so we are not sure how many updates it will receive. And in a device this expensive, I think this is unacceptable. But let me show you some features of this system. In the customization section, we will not find as many options as other devices. For example, yes, we can access a wallpaper store where we can access several images, but let's say it is something simple. We can also access a section of themes, but note, there are only 2 by default, although fortunately we can access this store where you can download many more that have a slightly more advanced customization. In fact, if you want to customize the lock screen to an extreme level, you should use this theme section, as by default, the lock screen does not have such advanced customization. There is a specific section for this, and note that what it allows us to do is to change the typography and style of the clock as well as its color, but we can't easily move it to the position we want, and it also allows us to add a special small signature on the screen and modify the corner accesses, but there's not much more than that. Fortunately, it does have the always on screen function, which will allow us to select some specific cover. It can be any animation, analog clock, digital clock, or even your own text if you want it to be displayed directly on the screen, and you can customize the font and color. And like all Android, it allows you to change the color palette of the entire system, and also the shape of the quick settings icons. Something slightly interesting is that it also allows us to change the animation in which the pages of our home screen slide, although that is something you can achieve with other launchers. But it also includes the simple mode, which I call Granny mode, which will make your device practically transform into Windows Phone with large tiles to make it easier to use. VIVO also has a dynamic effects section where it allows you to change a lot of system animations depending entirely on your tastes. It also allows you to have additional and special lighting on the edges of the screen, compatible with some music apps as well, so that you can see a rather attractive effect on the edges of your screen. Although honestly it is simple, but it works not only for music but also for calls and also for notifications. Obviously you choose the effect you want to have. And as I say, it allows you to change all kinds of animations, even the way you're going to enter your apps, the loading animation, the animation when you put in the USB port. So the customization of animations is really good. Obviously, this device also has the split screen mode, and note that to activate it, you can swipe up 3 fingers when you're in any app, and immediately the screen is going to split so that you can open another app. But in addition to this, a sidebar will appear, from which we can also open other applications. In this case, in a pop-up mode. These applications can be resized, and in fact we can also try to minimize them somehow in a small bubble. But you can only open 1 floating application at a time, so you can have a maximum of 3 applications on the screen at the same time. Fortunately though, the vast majority of apps do support this pop-up mode, including YouTube and Instagram. The device also allows us to take screenshots by swiping 3 fingers down. In fact, you can also take longer screenshots, which is always very useful. Obviously, you can edit them, share them, and even translate the screen with Google Lens in this shortcut. And it also has some other gestures like shaking the device to turn on the flashlight, but it only works if you are inside the lock screen. since if you have the device completely turned off, this gesture will not work, and also it is not a gesture that serves to turn off the flashlight, only to turn it on. And it has other smart controls such as, for example, answering automatically when you point the cell phone towards your ear, or switching between speakerphone and normal earpiece depending on the movements you make with the cell phone. It also has the Easy Touch button, where you can set up some additional shortcuts to be at your fingertips. It can also support 2 taps for quick shortcuts, or tap and hold, even hold and slide to the side, so it's a floating button with lots of options. And it does have a one-handed use mode, which, as you realize, resizes the entire screen. So personally, I find it a well-executed mode because it allows you to reach all the things on the cell phone easily. Although to close it, I wish it could be done by touching any empty area and not necessarily on the X, but the truth is that it is a mode that can be quite useful. In fact, you can also resize it to specifically fit the size you like. The device also includes a beauty mode compatible with WhatsApp, Messenger, or some other apps, but not Zoom, or some other slightly more professional video calling apps. And it has a task timer that allows you to automate certain things on your device, like vibrate mode, airplane mode, or a timer, but it's not that advanced automation. In the gallery, it also has a photo editor that integrates an object eraser, but it is not with generative artificial intelligence. So pay close attention, because in this case it's only going to fill in considering the pattern that it can detect in the background and similar things, but it's really not as advanced as features that we see today in other devices. I think you get to notice a lot how you see a blotchy effect in the image, although for some people it can be useful, but I think it's not as sophisticated as generative artificial intelligence editors. And finally, a feature that I find very useful is that it includes a video compressor directly in the gallery, so you can more easily send some long videos you have recorded without the need to download any additional application. And finally, it also includes a video editor that can be quite useful because it does not add any watermark and has several interesting options. You can even apply some themes that again you must download from the internet beforehand, but then you can apply an automatic editing to your video with special music, special effects, and even some text that you can apply. Although let's say they are simple templates that simply go on top of whatever you have edited, so it is not an automatic editing as we have seen perhaps in other devices, but it can be useful. With respect to artificial intelligence functions, VIVO doesn't offer any features like we're starting to see from other manufacturers. In this case, I could only highlight the incorporation of Google Gemini, but that is present in all Android devices, so we will not pay much attention to it. Let's talk about security now. It integrates an in-display fingerprint reader, which will allow us to register up to 5 fingerprints. And in this case, with the ability to also change the type of animation that shows the reading of your fingerprint, and will also allow us to change the animation when recognizing the fingerprint. So the truth is that it is very advanced in terms of the customization that it offers. Obviously, it also supports facial recognition, but it is only in 2 dimensions, so we will not pay much attention to it. But if you despair of having to be unlocking your device, but at the same time you want to maintain a level of security on it, we can highlight that it has Google Extended Unlock, which will allow you to select locations or trusted devices in which the device can remain unlocked. In conjunction with Google, it will also offer you the automatic filling of some forms. In this case, fortunately, it does do a verification before filling in the information, but it does not really offer other functions such as secure folder or child mode. What it will offer through its iManager application is an option to protect access to applications by first asking you for a password or your fingerprint before you can access certain applications that you have selected. And once you enter this configuration, you could also hide some applications. It also has an app cloner, so you can have 2 of them on the same device, and a secure environment where you can run apps that you might find a little suspicious so they can't access anything on your device. So in iManager, we're going to find a security scanner in collaboration with Avast so that we don't rely only on Google Play Protect. So I think that in security, it is not the most advanced, but it is not as lacking as some other devices. And let's talk about the battery, whose capacity is 5,500 mAh. It's a battery that is surprisingly larger than average in a device that is very thin. And in this case, I think it's a battery that performed well, just over 4.5 hours in my close-up drain test, which is somewhat remarkable, although I must say that there are some devices that with 5,000 mAh batteries reach this figure as well. However, I think considering it's a super slim device, yes, you're going to get very good battery life. And in the drain test that I did, but in the background, I found that it's a bit of an aggressive device with respect to the apps that are consuming battery in the background, although this does cause it to get to 8 hours and 22 minutes when you have this in the background. But translated into user terms, what does that mean? That the battery is going to be really quite outstanding, but sacrificing maybe some background activities. For example, if you usually use a watch of another brand, maybe it's going to stop being connected because the system is going to close that app forcibly. Or apps that maybe aren't so famous that you want to be receiving notifications from might get suspended so that they don't consume so much power. And the interesting thing about all of this is that through software you can't specify which apps you do want to have permission to keep running in the background. It's rather strange, but I insist that the battery life is going to be considerably good, and you also have a battery saving mode that you can customize. In fact, you can also ask it to automatically activate when the device reaches 10% battery or something like that. And in addition to that, you have the super battery saver mode that you can also set to automatically activate. Obviously, this one is going to restrict you a lot more things, much more focused on emergency occasions. But still, it can still give you access to some apps that you might consider essential, and you can manually add these shortcuts. The charger included in the box is 44 watts, and using this charger with 15 minutes, the device got up to 26% power. With 30 minutes, it got up to 48%, and the full charge was completed in 1 hour and 10 minutes. In some ways, we could say it's a little bit disappointing because 44 watts seems like it's going to give us a higher rate of charge. But you have to remember that it's a battery that's slightly larger than average. So I think it's a good balance between a large battery and a sufficiently powerful charge. But it's not a device that's going to charge lightning fast, nor will we find wireless charging or reverse wireless charging. And to take care of the battery, note that we'll find optimized charging nothing else, which is going to turn on your habits. And in case you leave your cell phone charging all night, it will try to learn that routine to charge slower, but it doesn't bring more advanced options. In connectivity, there are a few good things. One would be that it supports 5G networks, which is its duty in this price range. But it supports Wi-Fi 5, so it doesn't have such high download speeds. And in practical life, this could translate into if you want to download a movie or a music album before you go out, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer because it's not very fast. Fortunately, at the software level, it does have an option in which you can select which applications can access the internet with your mobile data and which applications can only do so via Wi-Fi. As I always say, this way you avoid bad surprises in your data consumption. But back to bad news, it has Bluetooth 5.1, which is starting to lag a bit. It's still not too bad, but for a 2024 phone, we could ask for a newer version. It also doesn't have NFC for you to make payments with your cell phone. Of course, it does not integrate FM radio, and fortunately, you can connect accessories to the USB-C port, but it is not able to project its screen through this port. The screen projection works exclusively wirelessly. Although fortunately, it does allow you to individually project a video, image, or music so you can do something else with your cell phone. Or project with the screen off to not consume so much battery and even protect your notifications so that they are only seen on your cell phone and not seen in the projection. Of course, it supports Android Auto, and with respect to the sensors, we could not ask for anything else. It has accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, orientation sensor, gyroscope, but there is something very serious here, and is that the proximity sensor, I have not managed to activate it neither by making contact with the device, nor by bringing it slightly closer, nor by placing it directly on the ear. So it seems that the proximity sensor could give a lot of problems. And in terms of ecosystem, Vivo is still a very Google-dependent brand. It does have some earbuds and even has some watch in some regions, but the truth is they don't have such advanced interaction. It only has Vivo's own technology called EasyShare, which is actually an app with which you can send and receive files between devices of the same brand, but in that case it is better to use Google's QuickShare, which is compatible with other Android devices, so it's all going to depend on Google. Google Fast Pair, Google Drive, Google Home, because Vivo doesn't have any ecosystem-focused stuff. Now, let's talk about the performance that we find in this device while we are doing the test of opening applications, as it incorporates the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor, a processor that at this price the truth is that it is difficult to accept. It is not that it is a lousy processor, But at this price, we will definitely find many more things. Here the advantage is that we are going to find 8 GB of RAM, so it somehow compensates for the fact of not having such an advanced processor. The device also gives you another 8 GB of virtual RAM that comes factory enabled without the ability to disable it, so you supposedly have 16 GB of RAM in total. As you notice, it took 3.8 seconds to open each application, this on average. The truth is that this means it is very slow opening applications. However, let's see how it behaves once the applications are open, because it seems that at least it is giving a little more fluidity once the application is already opened. In fact, watch how we can navigate between all these publication feeds and there is no problem at all. The RAM memory seems like it's really going to work well, but the weak processor could spoil the experience a bit if you're constantly closing apps. So the recommended thing to do on this phone would be to not close apps so that you can maintain a much smoother experience. Note that in this case it does seem to manage its RAM well. Although I'm not sure if it is already using virtual RAM, but with 8 GB of RAM is more than enough to have a fairly smooth experience in these applications and when we have so many applications open. So in that sense it does perform very well. It also has 256 GB of storage, which is another positive. And running a storage speed test, we realized that I think it does give us a good read speed experience. Although it's not able to keep it that snappy for that long, but it's actually okay. And obviously the write speed will be much lower, but still positive. But for one last practical test of this processor, let's edit a video. Obviously it has to be in 4K because of the price range. And I remind you that in this case it's several videos recorded with this device in 4K so that in total they add up to 1 minute. And let's see how long it takes to do this process. And that's it. It took 1 minute and 6 seconds. In other words, it's exaggeratedly slow for the price range. So you might notice it for these kinds of more complex tasks. Maybe opening applications you could still forgive it, but if you want to edit videos in very high quality, it's going to be very slow. For games, curiously, it has a kind of ultra gaming mode, but it is only within the settings. Here you can get to explain the operation of some tools like the esports mode that will try to optimize the experience of the cell phone, helping that no one interrupts you for a call or notification and the like. It also brings a vibration engine that supports 4D in some specific games, but in this case none of the ones I ran are compatible with that option. It brings another option to change the sound effects in games, but it's the same general system option, so it doesn't really seem to be that advanced. Note that it has an option to give priority of frames per second to some games, sacrificing resolution. In this case, it is turned off by default and we kept it off for our tests. It also brings another option to block notifications, mute calls, and prevent unwanted touches with some screenshot gestures and the like. Finally, note that it is also going to allow us to open some floating applications while we are playing, so let's start a game to see this more clearly. Notice that when opening a game, there is a side panel that is going to show us the CPU and GPU consumption that this device is having. It also brings 3 different performance profiles if you want to give priority to save battery or give priority to maximum performance. Note that you can also enable speakerphone calls immediately in the background from a simple button so that you are not interrupted in any way, or block notifications or reject calls automatically, although it does not allow you to add exceptions in a simple way. Note that it brings a motion control option that will allow you to activate some virtual buttons of your game simply by moving your cell phone. This is an option that can be attractive, so you simply have to turn it on and then configure it. Note that it supports gestures to tilt left, tilt right, even up, left and right. In short, there are several gestures that you can use. In this case, I am only going to configure 2 so that we can visualize this more clearly. One gesture will be to hit, another gesture will be to jump. Notice that now doing this gesture it will jump and doing the reverse gesture it will hit. It is up to you as a user how you want to take advantage of these gestures, but they are quite useful. So at least at the software level, if you can get to stand out with good options to play. However, at the hardware level, I can't say the same because, for example, in Call of Duty, by default, it gives us the high graphics quality at a very high frame rate and we can only go up to a maximum rate, but there is no way to raise the graphics quality as if we could find it with other devices. Also, there are few effects available, so it is a device with very low graphics support. You should know that this device does allow you to adjust the quality of the screen recording, which by default comes in medium quality, but for the test we turned it up to high quality considering that the graphics that the game really had were not that advanced. Although the truth is that once you're playing, it doesn't look like overly simple graphics. In this case, Call of Duty specifically did perform well, although I insist that with low graphics support, but actually remained very stable, with high frames per second and without too much heating. However, when playing this type of content, you will also miss the stereo sound that we already criticized, but we remember it in this section as well. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting to a medium setting at 60 frames per second. In this case, with this graphic configuration still maintains a good experience, it seems to run smoothly, although again with not exaggeratedly advanced graphics, but I think if you are not so demanding in that aspect, if you can get to give you a good experience, it goes smoothly and with good temperature control. The few low peaks that this device had are quite common in this game, so it's nothing really serious. In SpongeBob, it defaults to high quality and high resolution at 60 frames per second, and for the test we lowered it to a medium level. And even if you turn it down, you'll notice that it has very poor stability. There are many fluctuations, although it doesn't freeze completely, but it's not going to feel like a super fluid and super loose game, confirming that it's not a device focused on games. Although the temperature still gets to control, but overall you are going to notice more cuts in your game if you start recording the screen, so it won't be so ideal for recording gameplays. And finally, in Henshin Impact, this device by default offers low quality, but for the test we went up to medium quality at 60 frames per second. And here again we're going to notice lots and lots of fluctuations. So it constantly goes up and down, it doesn't maintain such a stable experience. The heating in this game did get to be noticeably high, so it won't be a disaster, but obviously at this price point you could find much more gaming-focused devices that will give you much higher performance with the ability to play on much higher graphic settings. Since in this case, remember, we are playing with a simple configuration, but if you don't care too much about graphic settings or quality, it can give you a loose experience in some games, especially if you don't record the screen. As a conclusion, this device is very focused on photography, maybe selfie and portraits, although even in those sections I don't think it's the most advanced, but it does a good job. The screen also does a good job, the Aura light can get to justify its appeal a bit, but the sound disappoints a lot and it is not a device that is going to be focused on gamers. If your priority is gaming, you definitely have to rule this one out. In addition, the fact that it has some shortcomings such as NFC or Wi-Fi 6 also make the device lose appeal. It will be up to you as a user what you want to give more priority to, but I definitely anticipate that it is an expensive device. For the time being, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can let me know. See you next time.